Okay, last week, this would be Tuesday, week 15, we talked about policies, we talked about models, trust, this from the Palo Alto. There are just a lot of different approaches. Discretionary, people can be allowed to do some things like set permissions on directories. Mandatory, everything is set. Some type of trust management system. What actions the user or principals can take. We have some kind of policy or rules to match those actions, and we credential people when they log in. AAA. Talked a little bit too about some of these policies. We did examples when we did the Cisco work in terms of role-based access to equipment. Security operating platform. I mentioned a lot. You next generation firewalls. They look at who the user is, what apps they're running, and what content are they moving. And so we can do security based on those particular things. Security can be split up into the network, what security we're doing in the cloud, and what security we're doing with the endpoints. And that's what we worked on here. Palo Alto product is Traps. Traps communicates with Wildfire, gathers information up. We talked about antivirus software versus just endpoint protection. Talk about checking streams as they come through. We gave an example. We have a VM server in our area that does our antivirus, make sure it's updated, and so forth. Tuesday, AWS, Brian Powers is going to speak. Friday, Jim Deegan's going to speak. We talked about having a solid foundation in security, and we looked at the Security Plus objectives. You can find them at CompTIA. And we talked a little bit about VPNs here at NIAC. NIAC uses a Palo Alto firewall. And we talked about security, east, west, north, south. And we used Work Server 2 as an example of how we access information in the DMZ on the academic IT side of the network. Compliance, regulatory is not the exact same as security. You can be compliant and still not be as secure you should be. We listed a few. There are so many regulatory things that refer to compliance. We compared perimeter-based to next generation's firewalls. We gave an example of Facebook in terms of an app, user, and content, how we can manage that. Perimeter-based zero trust. Segment networks, create trust zones, and then how do we manage that? Traffic, zones, trust principle, policies. We talked about some key things. You want to retain connectivity, you have to manage a huge amount of data, and how can we do this? We mentioned this, a couple of the students mentioned the idea of a black box. We're starting to use technology and machine learning in order to do a better job at the things where humans make mistakes, but we end up with this black box where we really don't know what the algorithms are doing. There's a whole unit on cryptography, public key infrastructure, and we talked about certificates. Public key, talked about public and private keys. We can get a certificate, we can distribute the public key, we have the private key, certificate authority in order to share keys, and we want to make sure we separated the idea. We SHA for hashing, we use AES for encryption, and we have a way to exchange keys. We talked about secured sockets, which now transport layer security. Oh, another thing, we looked at the dates in some of the certificates, and you can see certificates should expire. Finished up with endpoint security and traps. Brian Powers spoke. I'll review this. I'll try to be brief. He talked about where he started out with, use a different color here, PL1, Cobalt, then got into web development, then data warehousing. Wellmark, 2 million subscribers, 60 to 70%. Been there about 5 years. Let me correct that. Risk. There, I get my spelling right. Risk adverse. Okay. And then they had new leadership. You know, initially host everything themselves. New leadership, then their multi-year project of going, they develop a cloud framework, set up regions, data centers, categorization of everything, then started putting it into place, had to update all the versions of everything they have. So the process, and then finish it up, the final data warehouse, moving to S3 buckets, creating data lakes. Some of the items they're still doing SQL, reporting from raw files, JSON files as they move. Advantages, they talked about cost, speed to deliver, can script out things, patches and security, automation using scripts, being able to increase and decrease physical needs, which is hard to do on a hosted system. Challenges, security is always a challenge. New roles, down here, roles blurred, writing scripts, new best practices. He talked about some of the information, you know, they have to protect secure-wise. And I thought it was interesting, they said they're doing some of the work waterfall and some of it agile. Brian talked about sprints. They're managing this through Azure from Microsoft, moving more to the agile approach. And they mentioned some of their on-site stuff. He mentioned DMZ and so forth. Also, different ways that they train. Okay, so this was, you know, comparing how Wellmark is moving to AWS multi-year project. One more slide. Okay. This should be an A. I got a misspelling in here. That should be, whoops. Okay, anomaly, that should be an A in there. Anyway, we talked about Palo Alto. Here, I'm going to go this way here. Talking about antivirus signatures, anonymous, heuristics, and so forth. Better way to approach. We talked about securing containers, whitelisting, user app content, personal firewalls, host-based intrusion prevention systems on the end devices. So this leads to a layered approach. You know, you have a firewall, network intrusion prevention systems. You have protection at your host, in your network. So you have these layers. And then we talked a little bit about mobile device management, MDM, accessing what apps are running, and so forth. Mentioned network access control. And then that's pretty much a wrap on the course. So just a couple review things. We covered the security materials from the network security class. Actually, we covered a lot of things. Connecting networks. We spent 3 weeks on just connecting networks, which would be a Cisco NetAcad course focusing on WAN, and then we did network security, everything from securing devices, firewall switches, ASA, we did some work ASA, we did firewalls and so forth. And then we did the Palo Alto work, and we covered some key factors in the foundations, gateway course, and then just a few things from the essentials. The gateway was mostly review. There was a few things in there we hadn't specifically already covered up here. And then the foundation was really getting the basis of Palo Alto work. Alright, that's a wrap on the year.